Okay, so we're in our second last lecture. Quite scary, hey? It's really flown by. Anyway, so today we're looking at topic 5, which is approval to proceed, which will help you with your assignment 3. I know I touched on that last week with regards to the requirements, but it will kind of make sense now when we go through this part here, especially with looking at those requirements and making sure you address them all correctly. Okay, so there will be some key points we'll talk about. Now, before we get into that, does anyone know why, and I gave a bit of a hint last week, why do we do the approval to proceed letter? What is the purpose of that?
Just to make sure that the client knows what you're doing, or where they're at.
Yeah, where they're at, yep. So I'm just going to repeat that. So one of the students said to me that it's telling the client where you're at or what you're going to do next. And that's exactly what it is. So basically, approval to proceed letter is taking all the information that you've gained thus far in terms of your research, meeting with the client, anything that they've suggested that you need to further look into, which we gave you the task of doing assessment 2 with sustainability. That might not be the case. They might have asked you to research more into, say, for instance, the plumbing works. I'm just using that as an example. All right. So with that, then you go away and you put together almost like a draft letter. So some people also refer to this as the the initial building contract, okay? But we're going to keep it quite simple and just call it the approval to proceed letter, okay?
So it's just a summary then of all the information you've got?
Yeah, so basically it's actually telling the client what is the process of moving forward. So at this documentation stage, and that's what it is, it's a record of all the documentation so that everyone's on a clear page between what you as the designer are going to do and meeting those needs of the client, okay? So that the client knows exactly what is expected and how those needs are going to be met, okay? And the reason for that, why do you think we need to make sure that that clarification happens?
Cover your ass. Cover your ass.
Yeah, that's one way, covering your butt there. But also the main thing is to make sure that there is no living brief. Now, has anyone heard of that notion, living brief? Living brief means that, Emily, do you know what a living brief is? Where it changes constantly, correct. So a client will give you what we gave you in the beginning, which was the project information, right? Often that is seen as the initial information that a client briefs you on. And you go ahead as what you have done with your meeting with the client. And that's why we asked you as one of those questions, what is your vision, or what is your brief still the same? Because often a client will hear from other people or get information from other people, and suddenly that brief changes, or that initial project information given changes, all right? So you've gone ahead and calculated a fee based on what the client initially has proposed, and that was reiterated in the meeting. You go off and then provide some conceptual sketches, etc. You've drafted up now this approval to proceed letter, and the whole point of that is to basically cover yourself so that there is no living brief happening where other things are added to that. And then you're like, what? I only allowed a fee to cover X, Y, and Z, but now you're adding A, B, and C. All right. And that becomes a living brief. And it is most common in practice, and you're going to come across this. And sometimes, I remember with myself even, there'll be one project after the next. I'll change my terms and conditions because of something that has happened on site. And then I'll be like, okay, I'm sure I'm covered this time. And then something else comes up. And then you're like, oh, why didn't I see that? You know, so when it comes to this part here, it's literally identifying the fee that is associated with the things that you're pointing out in that approval to proceed letter. Okay, so that if the client is on site when things are going ahead and he says, oh, but I thought we were going to meet with, I thought that consultation with the engineer was covered in your fee. You can say, no, if you go back to the documentation identified in point 1.5, it said all meetings with consultants on site is for your cost, not for my fee. And therefore, then it's written down, it's like a contract, and everyone's on the same page. Does that make sense? Okay. But if it's not identified there, then unfortunately you haven't been covered, and then there's like he said, she said, X, Y, Z said. You know what I mean? So just be very clear that you do cover everything. And with the approval to proceed, you also allow the client to maybe in there, and I think I touched on that briefly with assessment 3 as an example last week, where some people have even left a section in their approval to proceed letter where they said, if there's anything that I have not suggested or covered, this is where you, client, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, can propose ideas or whatever. So you know that then when it comes to the final brief, you can bring that in and you can tweak that accordingly to your fees. Okay. So we'll have a look at some examples again, just to make sure that you get the gist of what is your requirements to complete for assessment 3, and that's the approval to proceed letter. Do I have any questions on that, what I've just proposed? You all good? Does that make sense to you, why we have this? So you can actually see that there is a progression from the assessments. The first assessment was research. The reason why we needed that research is that we didn't want to go in looking like complete idiots when we met with the client, not knowing what the site involved. All right? So that was where we had to do all the research about finding what council it was under, if there was any constraints, because it's all very well going into a meeting, and I know I'm harping on this, but it's so vital, because a client might say, oh yes, I want to have 300 people on site at one time. And you go, yeah, no, that sounds like a great idea, but you haven't checked the toilets, and you can see that they weren't compliant. So by then being savvy and knowing that information, you can say, yes, we can definitely accommodate 300 people, but unfortunately, due to a compliance issue, we can see that the toilets aren't sufficient. So that would be a first point of fixing up. So from that, then the client can see that you're knowledgeable, you're addressing their needs, and then you move on to then final research or looking up extra things like sustainability, etc., putting some concepts together, and then finally moving on to the approval to proceed letter, saying, I can do X, Y, and Z for you. Okay. And then they might come back to you and say, thank you for the approval to proceed letter. I'm very happy to proceed with you, but I have a question on point 1.5, and that could be due to fees. It's often the case due to fees. And they might say to you, could we maybe relook the payment options or the actual fee itself? And then you say, sure, we'll come to an agreement, and from there then we'll make some changes, And then I'll put that in the final brief. And if you're happy to proceed with me as your designer, then please sign in and send that back to me. And then work begins. And that's when you actually give or you issue your first invoice. That's when you ask them for first payment, because in order for you to start the work, you need money, right? So you need to be paid, and that will start you then with the conceptual ideas, etc. Okay, or getting that ready then to send off to council. Okay, so there's steps involved there. All right, so that's just showing you the progression from basically assessment 1 to assessment 4, and how crucial it is to get it right in the beginning before the project even starts. Okay. Does everybody understand that? If you don't, please ask me now or come to me in the break, and we can just make sure that you're all on the same page. Okay. All right, so just to show you where we are, so before you start, I'm just going into that topic there again, and I'm going into the learning program. And you can see that we've covered quite a bit so far, and now we're in week 7, all right? And week 7 is the lecture topic today, which is what I've just given a little summary of, which is the approval to proceed method. Okay, and then from there, then I'll look at again task 3, which is due next week, and then task 4, which is due in the last week of this term. Okay, so this part here is actually a revision of that part. Okay, so it shouldn't take too much time up when you are looking at task 4. All right. So just take that into consideration, that is 1 week later that you submit that. Okay. So task 3 is due week 8. Task 4 is due week 9. Okay. All right. Just to clarify all that. Okay. So today I'm going to actually show you again. We'll just go over assessment 3 so that you're all on the same page. And then we will look at task 4. I'll reiterate the ideas of the requirements required for task 4 in next week's lecture, so that everyone knows what to submit for then. Okay. I know there's a lot of repetitiveness that I'm saying, but I just want to make sure that everyone gets this correct from the start. Okay. So that's where we are in the program. All right, so those that want to follow me, we are looking at topic 5, so approval to proceed, and we have some slides there, a PowerPoint presentation. All right, and we're going to start with the first slide here. All right, so the whole idea with approval to proceed letter is the ability to sell an idea. And I remember in the beginning when I started, I said to you, you might not think yourselves as salespeople, but ultimately you are selling an idea. You are selling your service. You're also selling how you present yourself. So maybe your service is going against a big corporate company, but the person feels more comfortable dealing with you because they feel that they've got that rapport, okay? They've got that connection. So that's why I said to you how important it is when it comes to communication. We can communicate, but it's very important to be able to learn to connect with someone, okay? So just keep that in mind. And it's happened to me where I've gone across or I've tendered against larger companies, and due to overheads, etc., because I was a smaller enterprise, they went with us instead of going with a larger corporate company because they had larger overheads, etc., and they brought that into their fee, and because of that. So, but also because they felt more comfortable with myself. Okay, now I'm not just blowing my horn, I'm using this for example for you guys and why you must not be afraid to go against larger corporate companies for the same tender, just say. Okay, you can also be able to do exactly that and win that tender due to your expertise, due to you connecting with that person, having that connection, and due to your overheads. So that's quite critical in that sense. Okay, so over here, the ability to sell an idea or project to your client is critical to your success. How do you think you can sell that idea? You can sell that idea by what you present to them. Like in the beginning, I said to you, you could have a portfolio of some of your work. You can even use if you are someone entering into the industry, you can also use your projects that you've done here at TAFE, because ultimately that is seen as a project. And in that sense, you can be able to win them over with regards to selling your idea. Now, there is that possibility that you can't get your client's approval. What do we do in that case? The reason for that is often we go in blind, all right? We haven't done enough research. We don't know too much about what the project entails. We are unprepared, okay? Hence why it is so important to do what we're talking about in terms of the crux of this course, in terms of approval to proceed and finally the client brief. So that everything is documented, everything is in black and white, there is no gray area, and the main thing is that you've addressed your client's needs. Okay? So we really just don't want to get that no, okay? And if it is that possibility, if that is the possibility that there is a no, you could always follow up and say, if you feel that you would like to, is like, why did we not get that tender, or why did we not get that job? And often clients will tell you why. It could be down to money, just in terms of actual fees. It could be because they just felt more comfortable with someone else, so they just didn't have that connection with you. So these are the things that you learn from. Don't see them as negative. See it as positive criticism, if I can put it that way. All right. In my other life, I'm also in sales, so I ask that question quite comfortably. If we don't get that job, I say to the client, why did we? Do you mind expressing why we did not get that job? And then they will be ultimately frank with us. Either it was out of our budget, or we're thinking of going through our builder, and the builder has chosen someone else, etc. Okay. So with that, we really want to get to this part here where we want to be able to get that sale. Okay. And I call it a sale because that's actually what it is. It's a sale. Okay. But it's a service sale. It's not a product sale. All right, so we need to make sure that we focus on the client's needs. Very important. We can use a bit of reverse psychology. We can throw out an idea, and often this is something that you will get used to in terms of practicing how you can be able to win that client. It might not be your ideal ideas, but in a way, if you can address your client's needs, you've won your job. You've won the actual sale. So it's important to get the yes, to focus on the client's needs. That's ultimately your goal. Okay. Clients don't care about you and your needs. Okay. They only care about what they want to do with their project. So like for the Cumberland Hotel, they've set out a certain criteria that needs to be met. And you are the professional that has been brought in to make sure that you can address those needs, ultimately within that budget of $900,000. Okay. How do we deal with that? We make sure that the materials that are chosen fit within that budget and that all other requirements are met, and we try our best to be able to meet that within a time limit. Okay. All right, so the client is more interested in having their needs met. That's just reality. The sooner you accept this, the faster you will get that yes. Okay. All right. Has anybody come across these buttons, these yes, no buttons?
Yes.
Okay. We've got them at work, and we've even got one that says yes, dear. So there's one that it's a man's voice, and he just goes, yes, darling, I'll definitely do that for you. And we think that's great. So sometimes it's just a bit of humor that we have with regards to when we get yeses and nos at work. All right, so the reality is you are in sales. So that's what I started with in the first slide. The sooner you can actually grasp that idea, the easier it becomes. So as I said to you, if you feel that you have maybe not great connection skills, or that you feel that you can't really communicate, or you feel shy in terms of presenting something, then either get involved with maybe a personal coach or a business coach. There's lots of professionals out there, even a voice coach, where you can be able to learn, or go online even. I mean, the internet now these days and what's available for you is amazing. So you could even look into YouTube videos to try and improve your skills or your weaknesses. So look at your strengths and your weaknesses. And if that's a weakness, try and improve on that. Or, as I said to you in the previous lectures, what you could do is even bring in a colleague or bring in someone that has the confidence to talk quite freely about what you need to propose. Okay. All right, so the main thing is to solve the problems or meet the client's needs. So we're over here now. Now, I love this saying by Steve Jobs. He says here, get closer than ever to your customers, so close that you tell them what they need well before they realize it themselves. And that's what it is all about. It's either using that reverse psychology, either throwing out an idea, or getting to understand your client so well that you make them believe what you're wanting to achieve. All right. So keep that in mind when you are thinking about designing and stuff. So drop it in a conversation with them, and somehow they come back and go, you know, I'm thinking of doing this. And then suddenly you're like, oh my gosh, that's amazing, because you actually initiated that in a conversation that was maybe a week ago or something. So it's amazing, that's like the psychology behind communication and connecting with someone. All right, just remember that the approval to proceed letter is a way of also selling your idea or selling your concepts. So the way it's written out really needs to be appealing to the client, because that could be sent either through an email or through post. You could deliver it yourself and go through it with them. Then that's actually a stronger way of a sale. But often the case is in terms of approval to proceed, it will be sent as an email, and they are reading it by themselves. So it really needs to sound impressive, if that makes sense. Okay. All right, so the main thing when I said up here, solving problems and meeting the client's need, it's just reiterated down here where it says that if you can meet their design difficulties or meet the client's needs, you've got their attention. So you almost 80% there in terms of the sale. The purpose of the approval to proceed process is to have the client formally review, acknowledge it, and accept what you have proposed. All right? That's why I say no one likes reading a large documentation. all right? So you really got to make sure that you grab their attention and that it sounds appealing, all right? That's why often there is a cover letter with one of these documents to kind of show your enthusiasm with the project. Having formal acceptance and approval to proceed also signifies that the client is happy for the project to continue on to the next stage. So that's why I've got Mr. Happy here. All right? So this just shows you where we're at. We're at the brief part, so that's what we want. If we get approval to for the pre-design stage, then the next stages follow in a sense of making sure at each of those stages they're signing off. But we're only going up to that stage for this unit, all right? So you don't have to worry about anything further than that, but just to show you where that's at. Okay. So in the approval to proceed letter, and these are actually identified in your requirements for your assessment, but I've reiterated it here. Basically, you need to identify who the person is, so that's when you put it in your cover letter. So who are we talking to here at the Cumberland Hotel? What's their names? Mr. and Mrs. Smith, correct? All right, very generic, but Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Mr. Anthony and Mrs. Jane Smith, okay? So together they are seen as a team, all right? They haven't appointed anyone else, but if you were dealing with, say, for instance, a corporate environment, who do you think you'll be dealing with there? Anyone? Could be a representative from HR. Not normally. It'd probably be someone like a representative from the facilities section or sector, or it would be a corporate body. It could also be for instance, the directors. It could be them, or a representative for the directors. It could be their secretary. So when it comes to identifying who you're going to be dealing with, it's very, very important, because you need to not look like a fool and address it to someone else when you've been having this conversation with a person that you've been liaising with, all right? Okay? So here, it's important that you say, put in the address, Dear Mr. and Mrs. Smith, or Mr. and Mrs. Smith, the Cumberland Hotel address, okay? In this letter, then it starts with clarifying details with the client. What would we clarify there? We'd clarify, for instance, their vision, right? What was their ideal needs that they want to have met? That was to change the Cumberland Hotel to have a more formal wine bar area, to have a cider section where they're selling cider, to have entertainment, to have acoustic music playing. Do you see all those? Those are all needs that the client wanted, right? But they must actually correspond with the compliance issues, because ultimately you can't do those things unless those compliance issues are met, all right? So what are the compliant issues? The access to the environment without a ramp to get in. There's still a disability access required. The exit points are not really identified. The problems with the toilets and parking, for instance. All right. So those things first have to be met before or in conjunction with the needs of the client. Very, very important. Okay. And that's why that comes through in terms of even scheduling with the consultants. The main thing was also, if the integrity of the old building isn't met before you do the new section, well, you're building onto something that's old. That's not good. You need to fix something first in the old section, which is the heritage part, and we had to look at the roof, because why? There were watermarks, all right? ultimately, those watermarks mean that there could be a problem with the gutter system, or there's a problem that there's a leak in the roof and the truss in the roof might be affected, and that could collapse and fall and destroy part of the building. Okay. So scheduling of the consultants, in terms of consultations, you can actually say to the client, these are the people that need to be met with, but it's out of our budget. And then you can also be able to regulate those meetings with the client and saying, the structural engineer will come on this date, please make yourself available. All right. Now, this is also something that's important, is budgetary constraints. Okay, so what is a constraint? It's seen as like it's constricting. It's something that's like preventing something from happening. Okay, so what would that be in terms of the budget? What things could actually be seen as a constraint on the budget? We've got it written here. If we were doing a budget and we were covering the costs of meeting with the consultants, then that would affect our budget, because what they come through or what they say might cost more and affect our budgets. We remember we've been given a approximate budget of 900,000, right? We want to achieve all these needs for the client, right? But if the structural engineer says the whole roof has to come off and be redone, that's an unforeseen cost, correct? And that can actually then bite into our budget. So you can actually see how things can easily cost up quite quickly. All right. So we need to identify that in our approval to proceed letter, because these are things that we still don't know yet, because we haven't got the structural engineer's report yet, because we said that we will find that out, and therefore we need to make a section in this approval to proceed letter to say this is unforeseen, and depending on that cost, it could actually bite into that budget quite dramatically. All right. What else could be seen as a budgetary constraint? Think about it in terms of just normal things.
Resources not available, human and...
Resources.
Yes.
Exactly. So again, what kind of resources are you talking about?
Human resources, materials.
Materials, exactly. So if you're waiting for a material to arrive, just say reclaimed timber. You need X amount of reclaimed timber, and you've sourced it from a company, but they don't have enough, and they've got to wait for that to come in. That acts on time, and that can actually eat into your budget too. All right. So good, Marina, with regards to resources. What's another resource? Contractors. All right. So I don't like referring to the TV show The Block, but you've seen it a little bit on there, where there is contractors on site. They might not arrive on time, or there might be a dispute on site, and that contractor walks off site. Then you are delayed in terms of time again. All right. So then, in that sense, that affects the budget. Okay. So you can actually see that there are quite a few things that are unforeseen that you need to identify in the approval to proceed, even though you have addressed all the needs of the client and provided some great conceptual ideas, and you're thinking of the materials you're putting in, etc. But in reality, you've got to still put this in so that the client is aware that maybe the extension or the outside area can't maybe be done before the integrity of the building gets done first. Okay. So in that sense, that 900,000 can be eaten up quite quickly. Is everyone clear on that? Okay. All right. innovative design ideas being proposed. Sustainability research of designs, planning, setting you apart from others. This part here is crucial in meeting the needs of the client. This is a part of a requirement in the approval to proceed. Okay? This is where you become innovative in a sense of then choosing you over, say, for instance, someone else because you provided some great design concepts and they really think that that is amazing, and you've done a little costing or whatever, and you've come within a great price range, and in that sense, that could be appealing for them, that part. Okay? So that's where these pictures help, where you are proposing some sketch design work. That's why we kept asking you for that. We asked you also for some conceptual, visual concepts or ideas so that the client can visualize what his place potentially will look like. Not a copy, but an idea. Okay. And then again, to review what the client initially proposed. And is he or she still on the same page as when they first began? So like Emily said, we want to prevent the scope creep or a living brief happening. Therefore, we need to reiterate this in the approval to proceed letter, saying originally you wanted the bar to have now a wine bar cellar. You still wanted maybe to keep the pokies, depending on what was said to you by the client in the client meeting. So you propose all those things so that when he reads it, he goes, this is what I'm being costed on. This is what the fee will cover. Okay? Because they might go, oh my gosh, but I forgot to actually add the fence in. And you haven't put that in as a requirement. Okay? Then he could come back to you, or she could come back to you and say to you, I know that initially I said these were my needs to change the Cumberland Hotel, but I really feel that the corrugated fence needs to be the major requirement. And you go, well, I haven't included that within my fee, but don't stress, I will relook my fee and relook the cost of that replacement of that corrugated iron fence, and we'll put that in the final brief. Does that make sense? So that's what will happen. This is proposing everything in this part before that final brief where the client and you agree and everyone is on the same page of knowing exactly what is expected of each other. Okay. All right, the level of service also is important. Making sure that the client is very well aware where your services will come to an end in the project. And what is that? Where are you taking the service level to?
Pre-approval?
Yeah, so documentation stage. Okay? Anything after that, which is tendering or the actual project happening, that is for the client to handle. All right? So making sure that everyone is on the same page, knowing where you end your services, is crucial. What happens if the client comes back to you and says, I'm overwhelmed, I feel that I can't take it further, and I really want you to handle the rest of the project? What do you think then will happen? You start a new contract, correct? Because this contract or this approval to proceed letter and final briefing takes you to the end of this. Okay? Are we all aware of that? Okay, good. And what is the actual approval to proceed method? What do you think what is that part of the letter?
Signing and payment of service.
Correct. The approval to proceed method is the last page of the actual document where the client has a space to put their name and surname and the date and a signature. That means that they're happy to proceed. Okay? meaning that no changes need to be done, or they might say they're signing it, but they are querying page 5, 1.3 fees, for instance. Then that's when you go away and you will relook at that approval to proceed letter, tweak it a bit, and you put it into initial brief. Not initial, sorry, the final brief, and then they're happy with that and they sign that off too. Okay. So in that sense, approval to proceed is the last page where the client is actually signing that part.
So on that last page, do you write it out as saying Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and then and then you will just put your pricing like a list?
No, your pricing's already been on the pages before.
Oh, okay. So it's just basically
It's the same as a contract. So when you go into like a rental agreement, or if you're going into buying a new phone, for instance, they'll often say to you, sign each page so that you understand the terms and conditions, and then sign the last page. And then there's a space there for you to sign with your surname and name, say, for instance. Okay, it's the same thing here. Okay. And you can I don't mind you using the same kind of layout that is seen as in the examples provided for assessment 3. So if you go to assessment 3, assessments and submissions, assessment 3, you'll see that there's the assessment and there's 2 examples there. They've got some nice approval to proceed. The last page is quite nice, nicely written up. It says there I, and it leaves a space for Mr. and Mrs. Smith to write their name in, and then so be it. Okay, approve this and going ahead. Okay, so once you have the approval to proceed, which is seen as assessment 3, we then move on to the design brief, and this is it should be obtained from the client. Sometimes in the approval to proceed method, they might say no, they actually don't want to go with you. So sometimes I don't like having that section at all, because I really want to think positively here, and I don't want to put any negativity into the actual document. But some contracts or some approval to proceed letters by some companies will have 2 sections. They'll have a go-ahead section, and they will have a part where they will allow the client to decline. Okay? So then if you're going against, say, for instance, other companies or other people for the same job, they might have chosen someone else, and then they fill in this part where it is seen as a deferral, and in that sense, they send that back to you, and then you know that, unfortunately, you did not get the job. Okay? And that sometimes does happen. They might even not even sign the whole thing. They might just write back to you in an email and just say, thank you for your efforts, but unfortunately, we're not going to proceed with you. And it is unfortunate. But then that's when you can maybe have the courage to ask them back and say, just on that notion, could you just explain, just to improve myself or my skills or whatever, you can write it in a different kind of way. But was there any reason where we could improve ourselves? And that's where you can learn from your experience. Okay. Okay, so the design brief, which is assignment 4, we'll get to. This is the part where everything is then adjusted from the approval to proceed method, and it's reiterated in a final brief, and therefore there's still a signing of that, and then that's when you issue the invoice to start work. Okay? So when I say issue to start work, I'm saying issuing the documentation stage of what was identified, which is conceptual ideas to be drawn up, information to be written out and given to the council. For instance, the design approval and then building approval. Okay? This is not where actual initial work gets actually done. Because what stage is that? That's after our documentation stage. Okay. And I think a lot of students got confused with that. They thought that this is the part now where actual work can begin in terms of, you know, going in, getting contractors and everything like that. It's not. This is to actually, this is to start now what you've initiated in your lettering for documentation. So the actual documentation that's going to be needed for the project. All right, so again, just to help you, I've actually even put a little color chart here that there's no gray area. So we don't want the gray area, we want it to be black and white. So all needs to be very clear and outlined in your approval to proceed letter. And as Emily mentioned, that's the living brief there. You do not want anything other than that is mentioned in this approval to proceed letter to be brought in where it will cost you more later on. So a living brief is seen as check that the brief can't become a living brief without associated costs to the client. No scope for client to add things in, as you have been quite clear and specific. That's what a living brief is. You've identified exactly what you're going to do, and the client is knowing that these are going to be addressed, their needs are met, and anything out of that, it's seen as an extra cost. So remember last week I told you about the fees and stuff, and we looked at the percentage of the budget, which is sometimes between anything from 5% to about 7% on a 900,000 budget. Okay, so if they bring in anything else other than that's mentioned in this document, you can actually then say to them, I can do that, but on an hourly basis. Remember, we looked at hours and going to sites, and sometimes they want you just to help them to make sure that everything's going accordingly to what you propose. Then you can say on negotiation, and that's an entering into a new contract, by saying you're going to be there at $75 an hour or $120 an hour on site. Okay. Okay, so we'll be looking at some examples there. Again, no grey area. And then these are just recapping again what is required in Assessment 3, which I've gone through, and then Assessment 4 again. So the approval of final design brief being obtained from the client, having the fee structure and terms and conditions of service being established according to workplace procedures. All right, so then that is concluding today's topic. All right, so did that make sense to you of why?
What do you mean by workplace procedures?
So workplace procedures is what we're going to talk about next week in terms of where do you document all of this. It's very vital that you are either documenting minutes, you're either documenting in folders. So you know in AutoCAD you had your folders. It's the same kind of way. That's a work procedural policy, or you could have policies. Yeah.
So it's not occupational health and safety?
It could be. It could also be that. You could put that through. But remember, we're not taking that to building stage. We're taking it only up to documentation. So it's very minor to mention work. You can make a blurb in there or a point saying, you know, if you're taking on this project, whoever is this, the person, the builder that's won the tender, needs to make sure that work health and safety procedures are put into place. Okay, excellent. Yep, good question. All right, so when it comes to workplace procedures and policies, this is our topic for next week. And how do you document all of this so that you've got reference to it? And that if someone takes over from you, just say, for instance, you fall sick or you're injured, the person that takes over this meeting or meeting with the client or this project needs to be up to date like this. And that's why you need to make sure all your documentation is up to scratch. Okay. All right, so that concludes this this topic. right, let's go into, right, what we should do you want a quick break, and then we'll look at looking at the examples of assessment 3 again, and that will help you to be able to submit correctly. Okay, all right. Let's take about, 7 minutes? I love 7 minutes. I think it's awesome.